I hear the coffee grinder at exactly 6:15 every single morning. It is a harsh, mechanical, grating noise that tears right through the thin drywall of our 1990s colonial, echoing down the hallway and vibrating in the floorboards. For my husband, David, that sound is the gentle, comforting herald of leisure. It is the beginning of a day entirely his own. But for me, lying rigid under the duvet in the dark, that sound is the starting gun for a marathon I never actually agreed to run. I am usually already awake by then. My alarm is set for 5:45, but my body rarely lets me sleep that late anymore. I spend the first 30 minutes of my day just lying there, listening to my own breathing, mentally inventorying the aches in my lower back and the stiffness in my neck, trying to summon the sheer willpower required to put my feet on the cold hardwood floor. I pull on compression socks in the dark. I reach for the pain reliever on the nightstand, and then I listen to him moving around downstairs in the kitchen. He takes his time. I can hear the cadence of his movements, slow and deliberate. He'll pour the expensive whole beans we supposedly can't afford into the hopper. He'll fill the electric kettle and wait for it to reach the precise temperature for his pour-over. He'll stand there, probably leaning against the counter in his flannel robe, just waiting for the bloom. By the time he takes his first sip, usually sitting out on our back deck overlooking the small garden he suddenly has so much time to tend, I am already backing my 10-year-old sedan out of the driveway. My heater is blasting cold air against my shins, the steering wheel is freezing under my grip, and the digital clock on the dashboard glows a harsh fluorescent blue, reminding me that I am already running 5 minutes behind. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We are both 59 years old. We met when we were 25, standing in line at a grocery store in a blizzard, and for 3 decades, I truly believed we were walking the exact same path. We were the couple that sat at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings with a yellow legal pad mapping out our future. We had the 401 kiloseconds, the IRAs, the sensible mortgage. The original dream, the one we sold each other in our 30s and 40s, was that we would cross the finish line together at 65. We talked about buying a small A-frame cabin near the lake. We talked about taking a month to drive down the coast. It was always a shared vision, a joint exhaustion that would eventually yield a joint reward. But then the world shifted, and David shifted with it. It started subtly a few years ago. He was a middle manager in corporate logistics, a job he tolerated for years until the restructuring began, the demands increased, and the burnout set in. I understood the burnout. I felt it too. But instead of looking for a lateral move, he discovered a community online. He found the blogs, the subreddits, the endless hours of podcasts. He came to me when he was 57 with a spreadsheet that was color-coded and immensely complicated. He sat me down and enthusiastically explained that he was done. He had run the numbers. If we just tightened our belts, if we assumed an 8% market return, if we cut our vacation budget to zero, he could safely exit the workforce early. I look back at that conversation now, and I see the massive, glaring blind spot in my own psychology. I trusted his math over my own gut. I wanted him to be happy. I saw the gray in his complexion, the way he ground his teeth in his sleep, and I loved him enough to want to save his life. So I nodded. I agreed. I took on the role of the supportive spouse, believing that we were just accelerating our shared timeline. I didn't realize until much later that he wasn't accelerating our timeline at all. He was just stepping off the track, leaving me to pull the entire cart by myself. The day-to-day contrast of our lives has become a psychological weight that is almost impossible to articulate to anyone who isn't living it. I work 3 jobs. I don't say that to sound like a martyr. I say it because it is the literal, mathematical requirement to keep this household afloat in the current economy. My primary job, the one that provides our baseline, is remote data entry for a regional healthcare network. From 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, I am chained to a desk in the small, cramped spare bedroom that used to be our son's nursery. It is relentless, mind-numbing work. My eyes burn from staring at endless columns of insurance codes and patient demographics. The software tracks my keystrokes and my idle time. If I go to the bathroom for too long, my status turns yellow, and I get an automated email from a supervisor I have never met. I sit there, hour after hour, feeling the tension knotting between my shoulder blades, listening to the muffled sounds of my husband living his life through the wall. I hear the television turn on. I hear him laughing at a podcast. I hear the back door open and close as he goes out for a mid-morning stroll. But 3 o'clock is not the end of my day. At 3:30, I change out of my sweatpants, put on a stiff polyester uniform shirt, and drive to a high-end hardware and home goods store across town. From 4 until 9 at night, I work retail. I stand on concrete floors that offer no forgiveness. I smile at customers who are mostly my age or older, people who are actually retired, people who are browsing for custom cabinet hardware or expensive patio furniture to fill their endless hours of leisure. I ring them up. I bag their purchases. I apologize when the scanner malfunctions. My arches scream, my knees throb, and the fluorescent lights above me hum with a frequency that gives me a low-grade migraine by 7:30. And then there are the weekends. Because the data entry and the retail aren't quite enough to cover the gaps, I spend Saturday and Sunday mornings doing gig work. I drive my old car to grocery stores, wandering the aisles with my phone out, picking out organic produce and specialty cheeses for strangers. I haul heavy cases of bottled water up 3 flights of apartment stairs. I do this because the 2026 inflation reality is not the reality David modeled on his spreadsheet back in 2022. He didn't account for eggs costing what they do now. He didn't account for our property taxes being reassessed and jumping 20% in a single year. He didn't account for the fact that the electricity bill has nearly doubled, partly because he is home all day, running the air conditioning or the heat. This is where the entire philosophy he bought into completely falls apart. The pursuit of financial independence, retire early, the FIRE movement, sounds incredibly noble when you listen to a charismatic 30-something talk about it on YouTube. It sounds like freedom. It sounds like sticking it to the corporate machine. But what those gurus rarely discuss is the logistical, crushing burden placed on the remaining working spouse when the math doesn't quite work out. David thought he was achieving financial independence. What he actually achieved was shifting his financial dependence entirely onto me. The our money philosophy, a cornerstone of our marriage for 30 years, has completely broken down. When we were both working, pooling our incomes felt entirely natural. We were a team, rowing in the same direction. But now, the water has changed. The costs of living continue to soar into the stratosphere, and only one of us is bailing the water out of the boat. Yet David still operates under the delusion that the money I bleed for is a communal resource that he has an equal right to manage. The invisible labor gap in our home has become a chasm I fall into every single night. When a partner retires early, the unspoken assumption, the bare minimum expectation, is that they will take over the domestic burden. If I am out hunting and gathering for 14 hours a day, the cave should be spotless. But David's newfound free time hasn't translated into taking over the mental or physical load of running our lives. He views his retirement as a holistic release from all obligations. I come home at 9:30 at night, smelling of cardboard boxes and retail store dust, practically limping from the foot pain. I walk through the door, my nervous system still stuck in overdrive from the traffic, the customers, the scanning quotas, and I find David stretched out on the sofa, a book resting on his chest, looking perfectly, blissfully relaxed. I walk into the kitchen, and there are dishes in the sink. His breakfast plate, his lunch plate, a cutting board covered in breadcrumbs. The mail is piled on the counter, unopened. The dog's water bowl is empty. "One didn't know what you wanted for dinner," he'll say, calling out from the living room, completely oblivious to the rage that instantly spikes in my chest. He has had 14 uninterrupted hours. He could have made a roast. He could have scrubbed the baseboards. He could have done literally anything to ease the friction of my existence. Instead, he optimized his own rest. He optimized his peace. And he did it entirely at my expense. Returning home to a partner's nervous system is at a perpetual resting heart rate of 60, while mine is vibrating at 110, is a psychological torture I wasn't prepared for. It makes me feel completely unseen. It makes me feel like a machine that exists simply to facilitate his comfort. This resentment didn't happen overnight. It accumulated penny by penny, slight by slight, in a massive emotional ledger that I kept locked in my head. The tension began to manifest most acutely in our spending. We fell into a dynamic of permission-based spending, a toxic cycle where I, the sole breadwinner, somehow ended up feeling like a teenager asking for an allowance. David, with all his free time, took it upon himself to monitor our accounts with hawk-like precision. He would get push notifications on his phone whenever a credit card was charged. One evening last November, the weather had turned brutally cold. The thin soles of my work shoes had worn completely through, and the cold concrete floor of the retail store was sending shooting pains up my shins. On my way home, I stopped at a shoe store and spent $140 on a pair of supportive, orthotic-grade black boots. They weren't pretty. They were medicinal. They were necessary equipment to allow me to continue standing for 5 hours a night to pay our mortgage. I hadn't been home for 10 minutes when David walked into the kitchen holding his phone, an expression of mild, paternal concern on his face. "Hey," he said, his voice soft, reasonable, completely devoid of malice, which somehow made it worse. "I saw a charge for $140 at the shoe place. Did we really have the budget for that this month? You know, we're trying to keep the discretionary spending tight because of the property tax hit." I stood there, holding a glass of tap water, staring at this man I had loved for 30 decades. He was wearing a premium merino wool sweater he'd bought years ago, looking well-rested, well-fed, and perfectly comfortable. He was asking me to justify spending money on footwear required to work my second job of the day, a job I only had because he refused to work one. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the glass. I just looked at him and said, "My feet were bleeding, David." He blinked, clearly taken aback by the deadness in my voice. He backpedaled, of course. He mumbled an apology, said he was just trying to keep us on track, just trying to follow the spreadsheet. But the damage was done. The friction had peaked. I realized in that moment that he wasn't looking at me as a wife anymore. He was looking at me as an income stream. He was looking at me as a variable in his retirement algorithm. If the variables spent too much money on shoes, the algorithm might fail, and he might have to go back to work. And he would do anything to avoid going back to work. That interaction opened a door in my mind that I haven't been able to close since. I began to look at our entire life together through a cold, forensic lens. I started digging into the math myself. I stopped trusting his color-coded charts and started looking at my own pay stubs. The concrete sensory turning point, the moment the floor completely fell out from under me, happened during the open enrollment period for my primary employer's health insurance. It was late on a Thursday night. David had been asleep for hours. The house was dead quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the harsh blue light of the HR portal illuminating the dark room. I was clicking through the benefit options for the upcoming 2026 calendar year. I clicked on the breakdown for the premiums, and there it was, staring me in the face in bold black text. Employee only, $180 per pay period. Employee plus spouse, $650 per pay period. I sat there and stared at that number for a very long time. I multiplied it out. Over the course of a year, keeping David on my employer-sponsored healthcare plan was costing me over $12,000 in pre-tax income. $12,000. That was almost exactly what I made working my weekend gig jobs. Every single time I hauled a case of water up 3 flights of stairs, every single time I drove through the snow to deliver groceries to a stranger, I was doing it specifically to pay for my husband's health insurance. I dug deeper. I looked at the deductibles. I looked at the out-of-pocket maximums. David takes 3 different maintenance medications for his blood pressure and cholesterol. He sees a specialist twice a year for a lingering knee issue from his 20s. If I didn't have this job, if I decided tomorrow that I was burned out, if I wanted to retire early, if I got sick or fired, or if I just couldn't take the neck pain anymore, his entire fantasy would collapse instantly. He would have to go on the open market. He would have to pay astronomical premiums out of pocket. The psychological truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. I am his infrastructure. I am the only thing keeping his early retirement viable. My health insurance is his life support. My sheer endurance is the foundation upon which he has built his entire philosophy of leisure. He gets to read books about finding inner peace because I am willing to sacrifice my own. He gets to go for mid-morning hikes because I am willing to let my eyes burn staring at a monitor. He is not financially independent. He is dependent on my biological resilience. After that night, the silence at the dinner table became deafening. We were living 2 completely different lifestyles under the exact same roof, and the airspace between us grew thick and unbreathable. He would sit there, eating the dinner I had somehow managed to throw together in the 30 minutes between my first and second jobs, and he would talk about his day. "I listened to this fascinating podcast on Stoicism," he would say, chewing slowly, savoring the food. "It really makes you rethink your relationship with time, how we just give it away to corporations." I would sit there, pushing my food around my plate, listening to the sound of his chewing, the sound of his fork hitting the ceramic, the sound of a man who had completely lost the plot. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him that the only reason he had the luxury of rethinking his relationship with time was because I was still giving all of mine away to keep the lights on. I was subsidizing his stoicism. I was underwriting his enlightenment. But I didn't say it. Not immediately. The resentment just built, layer upon layer, until it hardened into a cold, unbreakable resolve. I realized that if I didn't stop this, I was going to die at my desk. I was going to drop dead on the floor of the hardware store, and my last conscious thought would be wondering if David had remembered to take the chicken out of the freezer. The deconstruction of our original dream didn't happen with fireworks. It happened on a dreary Sunday morning last month. I had deliberately taken the weekend off from the delivery apps. I had turned my phone on silent. I walked into the living room carrying a manila folder, and I found him right where I knew he would be, sitting in his favorite armchair, reading the Sunday paper, a cup of perfectly brewed coffee steaming on the side table. "David," I said. My voice was calm. It was the calm of someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose. "We need to talk. Right now." He looked up, lowering the paper, sensing the shift in my tone. "Is everything okay? You look tired." "I am tired," I said, sitting down on the edge of the sofa, facing him. I didn't lean back. I kept my posture rigid. "I am profoundly, fundamentally tired, and we are going to talk about why." I opened the manila folder. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I laid it all out like a prosecuting attorney presenting evidence. I pulled out my pay stubs from the data entry job. I pulled out the pay stubs from the retail job. I pulled out the 1099 summaries from the delivery apps. And then I pulled out a printout of the health insurance premium breakdown. I laid them all out on the coffee table, covering the glossy magazines he liked to read. "This is what it costs to fund your retirement," I said, pointing to the paper. "This is the reality of the math you showed me 2 years ago. The spreadsheet was wrong, David. The world changed, things got expensive, and instead of adjusting your plan, you just let me absorb the difference." He tried to interrupt. He tried to defend himself, falling back on the old talking points. "We agreed to this. We talked about this. If you just let me reallocate some of our index funds." "Stop." I cut him off, my voice sharp enough to make him flinch. "This isn't about reallocating funds. This is about equity versus equality. We are supposed to be partners, but right now you are acting like a dependent. Your individual freedom is coming at the direct expense of my physical and mental health. Your leisure is a luxury, David, and it is a luxury that I am being forced to subsidize with my literal blood and sweat." I watched his face change. I watched the comfortable, relaxed veneer crack as the reality of my words finally penetrated the bubble he had built around himself. For the first time in 2 years, he looked at me and actually saw the dark circles under my eyes. He saw the way I was holding my neck. "I am not your beast of burden," I told him, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, but feeling necessary, essential. "I am your wife. We were supposed to cross the finish line together. Retirement is supposed to be a shared milestone, not a solo escape pod that you launch while leaving me on a sinking ship." I didn't leave room for negotiation. I established new, absolute boundaries right there in the living room. I told him that I was giving my 2 weeks' notice at the retail store on Monday. I told him I was deleting the delivery apps from my phone immediately. I told him exactly how much my remote job brought in, and I told him the exact deficit we would be facing every month to cover our basic bills, the property taxes, and the grocery inflation. "I am no longer bridging the gap," I said. "If you want to keep the house, if you want to keep eating the way we eat, and if you want to keep the health insurance that allows you to see your doctors, you are going to bridge it. You are going to find a job. I don't care if it's consulting. I don't care if it's driving a school bus. I don't care if you have to stand on the same concrete floors I've been standing on, but you are going back to work." He sat there in silence for a long time. He looked at the papers on the table, and then he looked at his hands. He didn't argue. He couldn't. The ledger was completely unbalanced, and he knew it. That was a month ago. The aftermath has been incredibly imperfect. David is currently looking for part-time work. He spends his mornings updating his resume instead of grinding expensive coffee beans. He is networking on LinkedIn. He is looking into contract work in his old field. But the house feels different now. The tension hasn't evaporated. It has just changed shape. He is resentful. I know he is. He feels like I robbed him of the dream he worked so hard to rationalize. He feels like I changed the roles on him. And in a way I did. I woke up from a deep sleep and realized I was drowning, and I grabbed onto him to save myself. He is doing more around the house now. The dishes are usually done when I log off my computer at 3 o'clock. Sometimes he has dinner started. But it feels transactional. It feels like he is doing it because he has been mandated to do it, not because he genuinely wants to care for me. The romantic partnership we had, the shared vision of walking hand in hand into the sunset, has been severely damaged. I don't know if you ever fully recover from the realization that the person you promised your life to was perfectly content to watch you work yourself into an early grave, so long as it meant they didn't have to set an alarm clock. We are redefining our shared future, trying to piece together a sustainable life where neither of us is sacrificed for the other's comfort. But when I sit at my desk in the spare bedroom, processing insurance claims, rubbing the ache in my lower back, I look out the window at the empty deck. The chair is vacant, the garden needs weeding, and I wonder, in the quietest, darkest part of my heart, if we are just entirely too late.